Marty Cohn, and welcome to episode 12 of PR Benefits, a show that explores the role of public relations in the COVID-19 era. I've been a PR practitioner for over 45 years, helping a wide array of organizations successfully communicate their messages to targeted audiences. I mistakenly thought that 9/11 would be the watershed event in my lifetime. Communicating in the aftermath of that tragic event was challenging. Then came the global economic downturn in 2008 with more lessons in crisis communications. However, 12 years later, we have the coronavirus pandemic, and new challenges in uncharted waters have emerged. My guest today is Josh Poupore, Senior Vice President of Corning Place Communications in Albany, New York. Josh has over 15 years of professional communications experience. Prior to joining Corning Place Communications in 2015, Josh worked for the New York State Dental Association as their Assistant Executive Director, where he oversaw communications and marketing efforts for the 13,000 plus member professional association. Prior to that, he spent 8 years coordinating media relations and public affairs campaigns for Harvard University. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Marty. Glad to be here.
I got to tell you, it was fun to read about you and, dental, in terms of the Dental Association. I have to tell you that when I started out, I already admitted 45 years ago, I represented a bunch of dentists. And we formed an advertising cooperative called Independent Dentists of Massachusetts. And we were the first agency to do those gruesome before and after pictures. And it won awards. So I always, so every time I see anything about dental, I just go back to my roots. So Josh, 15 years of experience. Tell me, how did you get started in public relations?
Geez, that's it's actually closer to 20 now. We need to update our website.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. That's us. So I actually got my start in public relations by accident. It was not something that I had sought out after college. So I went to college as in Elmira College over in the southern tier of New York, and I was an English major. And so when I graduated, the logical question that a lot of people asked, my parents included, was, what are you going to do with an English degree? A lot of my colleagues, my fellow students went on to teach. I had done some student teaching at the local high school and decided right away that wasn't for me. So I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. Grad school was an option. I think I had an LSAT review book that gathered dust on my coffee table, as a lot of students did back then in 2002. So I was very fortunate. I moved to Boston and I got a job at Harvard University, as you mentioned. My first job was in the Harvard College Library, which most people don't know this, but probably would assume. Harvard University has the largest academic library in the world and the second largest library overall in the world. Over 90 libraries across the campus, millions of volumes, just a really incredible resource. And as luck would have it, my job was as the assistant to the director of communications for the Harvard College Library.
Wow.
So yeah, just totally by blind luck, I ended up in a job, kind of communications adjacent. It wasn't directly a communications role because I was fresh out of college. I didn't have a lot of experience, but thankfully I had a really, really wonderful boss and mentor. And she had, years and years of experience in corporate communications at Disney World, and then in academic communications at Harvard. And, as she would give me work to do, and I would do it, and she would give me more. And then she said, how about writing some stuff? And it just kind of led, from there. And before I knew it, one day we sit down and she has a conversation. She goes, Josh, she said, have you ever thought about what you want to do next? And I said, well, yeah, I've been giving it some thought. And she's like, well, what about this, communication stuff? You seem to like it. And I said, yeah, I really do. She's like, well, it could be a good career if you're interested. So that's how it all started. I wish I had a more glamorous story.
No, it's great.
Yeah, it was organic.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I'm glad that you that she steered you into this direction, because
Yeah.
it is it's a great profession.
Mm-hmm.
I love public relations.
Mm-hmm.
So Josh, so what I do is I want to break down into little time bits here. So let's think in terms of pre-COVID-19. So go back 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the highlights of your pre-COVID-19 career?
There were a couple of highlights of my pre-COVID-19 career. I break my career up into phases. There was the first, phase of my career, and that was the 8 years at Harvard. The second phase, moving to Albany, when I worked for the Dental Association, and then the third phase, moving on to an agency, Corning Place Communications. And there's been highs and lows during all of those phases. I would say more highs than lows. Early on in my career, one of the highlights at Harvard was working on the inauguration, the installation, I forget the exact title we used at the time, of the first female president of Harvard University. That was really exciting, and I worked with some really phenomenal professionals there. And I really learned the ropes and saw how to do things the right way. And that was an exciting time. The Dental Association, most people probably don't realize this, and maybe they do. There's a huge unmet need for oral hygiene in the United States. So many people don't have access to, a dentist on a regular basis. And unfortunately, because of that, there's a need for these events called missions of mercy. And it's where state dental associations gather volunteers for 2 or 3 days in a big space, a sports arena or something, and offer free dental care to anybody who shows up. And that was one of the most eye-opening, humbling, but rewarding experiences of my time at the Dental Association, was seeing the thousands of people that streamed in to receive dental care, and people crying because they'd been in chronic, terrible pain for a long time, and having that pain relieved. That was really, that was a powerful experience as a public relations practitioner, because I helped tell that story and get those people through the door. That was really very rewarding. Corning Place Communications, I've got to work with so many great clients, and we've done, award-winning campaigns. It would be hard to narrow it down to just one client, but I would have to say my greatest joy is when clients are able to realize a goal that they've been working on for a long time, trying to pass a bill that's going to help, whether it be college students have access to tuition assistance, or making sure that first responders have access to disability or death benefits, really kind of weighty stuff. But when our efforts help push them over the edge and get their legislation passed, that's also very rewarding.
Good stuff, and thank you for really breaking it down that way. All right, so now let's move to COVID. So what are you doing for your clients during COVID-19?
A little bit of everything. So we're helping our clients in a lot of ways to navigate the COVID-19 crisis. One of the things that we did right away was reach out and say, you're going to have to communicate what you're doing. So we have some organized labor clients, we have a lot of association clients, some healthcare clients, and we immediately reached out and said, communicating with your audiences is going to be essential, whether it be updating your website, providing statements, being available to the media. We basically reached out and said, we're working pretty much, at your convenience around the clock, and whatever you need, we're available for. Here's some ideas of what we think would help you, and here are some examples that we can show you that have been effective, and then we have some examples of things that we saw that aren't quite as effective. But we tried to be proactive, We tried to be nimble, and we tried to be understanding of the fact that our clients are struggling just as much as we are, and we are probably not their primary focus. Generally, unless there's a crisis, most of our clients are thinking about, how do they communicate with their membership, that sort of thing, and just how do you keep the lights on, how do you keep things going? So we had to be supportive without being disruptive, without being a problem to them. And I think that's always a delicate balancing act when working with your clients, is making sure that you are keeping them focused on the important things, but you're not getting in the way of their primary work.
So I would be remiss if I didn't bring up at this point, practicing what you preach. In the middle of all this, you bought a house.
Yes, I did.
And not only did you buy a house, which that in and of itself is stressful, and negotiating all that, you bought it during COVID-19, and then had the foresight to be featured in the Times Union about buying a home during the pandemic. Yeah. So kudos for you in showing public relations at its best. And I hope your new home is working out for you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's one of those things as public relations practitioners, and you'll know this, Marty, firsthand. It's important for us to maintain relationships with all of our, our colleagues and peers in the media. So I reached out to a reporter at the Times Union who I knew well, and she focuses regularly on real estate. And I saw some of her stories that were more national, like downturns in the economy and the real estate market. And I just sent her an email saying, hey, I'm buying a house right now, and it's kind of an interesting process. And next week I'm having my closing, and it's in the parking lot of the bank. And it's a kind of interesting visual. I'd be happy to talk with you about it if you're interested. And she was really interested. Yeah. And so it just kind of took off from there. And I received so many emails and text messages about that. People thought it was crazy. But I have to say, everybody I worked with, from the realtors to the home inspectors to the bank and the lawyers, were really very professional, followed the guidance of their organizations. And here, tying it all the way back to communications, the New York State Association of Realtors, the New York State Bar Association, the Independent Bankers Association did a great job of communicating with all of their members on a regular basis so that they were aware of the guidelines and what they could and couldn't do. Now, I will mention, none of those are clients of ours. I'm just recognizing the good work that they did communicating with their members. And I think that that's just further highlights the importance of being mindful of communications during a crisis or the pandemic, and why it's so important, because it does have an impact on people trying to just go about their lives, selling and buying houses.
Sure, but what I also like, and it was a really good story, but what I also liked about it was, in terms of maintaining your relationship with this reporter at the Times Union, media channels are, we're seeing a reduction in the number of newspapers. The journalists themselves who have done, I believe, a fantastic job locally reporting on what's going on. Yet, they're faced with certain economic realities of decreased advertising dollars, causing a decrease in monies for salaries. So I think. Are you finding in Albany, the capital of New York, and where the governor regularly, has his news conference, and I've been watching the media show up at his news conference. Do you sense a change in the media during COVID-19?
Yeah, I do sense a change in the media during COVID-19. There's certainly been, cutbacks at a lot of the local newspapers. Definitely, I've seen the effect. So earlier during the pandemic, one of my clients was announcing a executive director who was leaving that role from a pretty high-profile organization. and they wanted to announce it in a way that made sure that it didn't look like it was COVID related. It just happened circumstantially, it just happened to be at the same time. So I reached out to a local paper and the business reporter, and I didn't hear back for a couple of days. And so then I reached out, I just sent it to the general news address. I reached out to the editor, and basically they got back to me the following week. They finally did run the story, but much later than I expected, and said, like, you know, we're having challenges during the pandemic. We weren't, you know, somebody thought they had it, somebody else thought they had it, and it just kind of slipped through the cracks. And that's what really, you know, because my experience over, I don't know, 18, 15 years, whatever it is, working with reporters, is that they are really good at getting back to you if you have something newsworthy, right? Like if it's newsworthy, they'll get back to you right away. If it's fluff, then it might take a while. And this was, you know, very much newsworthy. So it surprised me. And I'd worked with these reporters before. They're very good. So that was the first indication to me that there was kind of a crack in the foundation. And there've been other, you know, little things, but that one was directly client related. They ultimately got to the story, but they were usually much more on their game than that. And that really hit home with me that, wow, this is definitely going to be a different environment that we're working in until, you know, that day when people get back to normal, if that day comes.
Okay. Good segue. So we're emerging. Your governor is everything's opening up. We're beginning that new normal, air quotes. So what do you think the role of public relations is going to be in this new normal?
I think that the role of public relations in I don't want to say post-pandemic era, because, you know, I'm not sure that we're ever going to get to that, but in the kind of, you know, pandemic era normalization, I guess, of pandemic life, I think the role is going to be less face-to-face. I really like meeting my clients face-to-face. I think that there's great value in that. And I mean in person, not through Zoom. I've always seen great value in that. I think when you're sitting in a room with somebody, it creates the opportunity to learn more about them. I think sometimes when you're working with clients, they try to think ahead. For instance, you sent me questions ahead of time, and I tried to think about the answers in advance. But sometimes when you're just having conversations, like you'll say something that sparks another line of inquiry. For instance, somehow it might come up during a conversation that you and I are both involved in service organizations, which could lead to the story you told me about the work you've done with Rotary and the dairy producers in Vermont, which leads me to tell you about the work that we're doing with the Northeast dairy producers. So, I mean, it creates an opportunity for new lines of discussion and inquiry, and you can make connections that you couldn't make. So I think it's going to challenge us to have those opportunities, because we won't be meeting face to face as much. Zoom is a nice, you know, backup, but in my opinion, it's not quite the same. Another way I think that it's going to affect and change communications and public relations as a profession is it opens the door, I think, now for more people to work from home. My office prior to the pandemic was very traditional. You know, we were in the office on a regular basis, and it'll open I think it'll open people up to the idea that you don't need to just seek out your local talent pool. You can seek out employees. You know, we're based in Albany, but we could very easily hire somebody in Buffalo or Brattleboro or Boston or some other city that starts with a B. We're going to stick to the B cities, though. Boise, yeah, whatever. So I just think that that's going to change things a bit. I think it's going to open people up to the idea of remote work and what that means. And then lastly, I think people will look back and see it's one of those seminal moments for public relations, right? Like everybody that's taken a PR class in their life has heard about the Tylenol case, of how you do it right. and then more recently of the BP oil disaster in the Gulf, of how you do it wrong. I think that we're going to have an opportunity to go back and look at organizations that did it right and did it wrong, and create kind of a new playbook for how we handle communications in a post-pandemic era.
I couldn't agree with you more, Josh. Thank you so much for coming on the show. That's Josh Poupore of Corning Place Communications in Albany, New York. I also want to thank Rich Melanson of BCTV for helping to edit this show. My daughter, Rachel Cohn, a professor at Ball State, who is helping me with the technical assistance of putting the podcast together. And also Twin Musicom for letting me use their music, Hat the Jazz, that you're hearing at the beginning and at the end. I'm Marty Cohn in Vermont. Stay healthy.